Terry Binion. How are you? Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you too.
Yeah, what is does 2025 hold some interesting things for you, do you think?
Well, I am planning to sell the house and move to West Virginia and get out of Florida after 43 years. So, I was in the garage earlier today, this morning, and moving some stuff around. Stuff is moving and dust is flying and memories of people and places and things are swirling through my head as I filter through all of my belongings.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you were a fairly recent guest on my other podcast, so hopefully people saw that, and I will put links to you in the show notes to this episode of Walking Inside Poems. But just a super quick, high level, tell people who you are, please.
I'm Terry Binion. I live in Orlando, Florida. I'm a singer-songwriter. Um, Originally from a place called Jacksonville, North Carolina, and that's the basic info right there.
Yeah. And you chose a fascinating poem, Frank Stanford's Kite Tied to a Tombstone. I definitely want to get into that and talk to you a little bit about Frank. Let me start though. I'll just read the poem, and I'll put the text of the poem in the show notes for people to look at. But let me read it first, and then let's talk a little bit about Frank.
Okay.
Fascinating guy. Kite Tied to a Tombstone. I mean, right there. What a title.
Yeah.
They say there was a boy wonder. I mean, a real one. So good looking it hurt you to see him ride his black horse. He foretold the weather, the lean years, and the way the music would go. No one in the country had ever seen him. They only heard what the gypsies told. Now this boy took a willow switch one night, tied it to his neck, swallowed all the butterflies thick as fog. He leapt in the bogue, eyes wide open like the tambourines and the mandolins of the Ozarks. A fisherman down the way heard his neck break. He said it sounded like a cracking bow or an oar. You know how you tell a horse, get up. They cut him down, took him to town. Then the girls asked the blacksmith to open his belly. Sure enough, they found the mourning cloaks, the arrowhead, some string, parts of a broom, a rolled up map, no trace of love or anything else. Then it rained. The butterflies turned to dust like the boy's hair. Later in life, the horse drinks from stones, and everyone reckons the rain might have touched his toes, broken his fall. Wow. That's definitely Frank Stanford. I've been diving into Stanford's poems and a little bit into his biography, and this is a really good representative poem, I think, of him, even though it was unpublished in his life, and it came from this fascinating volume here, which is kind of it's from the archives. It's a lot of things that weren't published in his life. Yeah, a lot of letters, for example, between him and Alan Dugan, which I read Dugan in the 70s and I'd kind of forgotten about him, so this was cool to remind me of Alan Dugan as well. But let me turn it over to you and ask you why Frank Stanford, why this poem?
Um, because it was fresh. It was there on the table. I had ordered the book after reading Lucinda's memoirs. In fact, I bought probably two or three other books. I, in fact, bought another book of his, and I confess I have not dove into it. But I also bought books about snake healing, snake handling in the South, a book called Salvation on Sand Mountain, Snake Handling and Redemption in Southern Appalachia. Okay, so this is, all coming from Lucinda Williams. And this poet, C.D. Wright, is also in her circle.
Yes.
And I didn't know that until I read the memoir. Until I read the memoir,
Mhm.
but I've had this book for years. Um, but anyways, the book was there, and I'm not sure how I came about finding this title, Kite Tied to a Tombstone. Um, but it was, full of visuals, and it was just one page, and it was dark.
Yeah.
And so it was once I saw it, that was it for me.
Yeah. Just one page, unlike The Battlefield Where the Moon Says I Love You, which was an epic poem of his that is, I don't know how many pages. It's, 300 pages, something like that.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wowza.
Yeah.
Wowza.
And
Yeah.
I mentioned to you that I had a brief conversation with James McWilliams, who is a who is actually about to publish a biography of Frank. I think it comes out this summer, and
Wow.
he's also editing the third edition of that epic poem, which hopefully will come out this fall as well. So pretty timely here. Uh, let's maybe get into. Well, I don't know. Before we get into the poem, let's talk about Frank a little bit. I don't know how much you know about him. Let me just tell you a little bit I know, and then maybe you can add to that. Uh, I think one of the things that resonates is when Lucinda said in her memoir that she knew from an early age that the kind of man that she was attracted to was the poet on a motorcycle. And that's very much Frank Stanford. He was a genius, committed suicide, unfortunately, at the age of 29 by shooting himself in the chest 3 times, which I'm not even sure how you do that. But
Yeah.
he was a philanderer, was sort of living with 2 women at the same time. And it turns out he had a lot of other women on the side. He was incredibly prolific for a guy who was 29. I think he published 7 or 8 books in his lifetime. And then, of course, there's been more since then. A really, really fascinating character. I can't wait for that biography. That's going to be really interesting. And the cover of this that we both showed is a painting, actually. I thought it was a photograph when I first looked at it, but
Yeah.
it's a painting, and it's unfortunate this is black and white because the original is in color, and it was painted by uh, his wife Jenny Stanford. So yeah, that's a little bit about Frank. His poetry is not very accessible for a lot of people. It feels stream of consciousness. It feels like a lot of really fascinating images that may or may not be connected to each other. It will really frustrate trying to read it um, in a conventional way as to what does this poem mean. I think, we can certainly derive a lot of meaning, but it's not that traditional narrative or that traditional lines that you say, oh, I see what he means there. It can be really confusing. It can be even frustrating, but it's beautiful.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, you have to spend time with it. And also, I believe it was the person who wrote the introduction to this book that we both have up on the table today, that in some words spoke about how Frank, his mind, it he's in he's encapsulating the universe in so many ways. Like he's vastly covering so much of life, experience, earth, death. Just it's just so vast. He's talking on two opposite sides of our experience. He's talking from two different sides of this earth and all that's going on at one time. And it boggles my mind. Actually, it's like there's a ricochet going on in there in my head. It makes me a little dizzy when I read his stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just incredibly active mind. I mean, it's just try to write this way, you know, and he just wrote thousands of pages this way, and just one image after another that you just read and go, wow.
Like, who is he? Like, who is he? Where did that mind come from? Where did it all come from? Was there even an influence, or was he just, his own, was he an alien, in a
Well, you know, you do see a
world?
lot of influence from the South. You
Yeah,
see, I know he spent a lot of time growing up around African American folks, and you see a lot of that kind of vernacular in his poetry. By the way, someone asked him, "What did you learn by spending so much time growing up around black people?" And he said, "How shitty white people treat them."
yeah,
But you see a lot of that kind
yeah,
of. It's interesting. You got the snake handling book and the connections with Lucinda. He's very much a man of the American South for sure. I think he was
yeah,
born in Mississippi, lived in Arkansas, was a student of Lucinda's father. Uh,
yeah.
yeah. So let's get into the poem a little bit here.
Okay.
I want to put a little bit of a flag in that, just the title, because the title itself is so incredible. It's real easy to just kind of gloss over that. But you think about you can see that image of the kite blowing in the wind tied to a tombstone. And then you have that dichotomy of something trying to get free, something blowing in the wind, trying to reach the heavens, while at the same time it's stuck. It's grounded in this tombstone. Isn't that incredible?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, that that did come to mind. I did sit with this a couple days ago to read it again. You just to be for a couple hours. I was with this book and reading over this one poem and making notes, and also like looking at a couple other things. And I think the kite also reminded me the things that were found in the belly. It's almost like a when you see the future, when you're predicting the future, when you can see your own suicide, when you can see it since you were a child. Kites, to me, it's a child's toy, or at least they're introduced to us kind of that way. Um, but it's almost like this is my remains. This is me wanting to get away. This is wanting me to leave. I'm tying myself to this idea. I'm tying myself to my
Yeah. Yeah.
death. Yeah.
And it's interesting you say that, because one of the things that James told me when I had my conversation with him about Frank, he said that Frank sort of thought he was clairvoyant to some extent. He really did sort of think he could see the future.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm
So
sure.
this boy wonder, here's an interesting reading, and I don't think this is literal at all. But I want to show you how we can connect that to Bob Dylan. Dylan is sort of in our consciousness now with this new film. And by the way, Frank had sort of real ambivalence about Dylan. To some extent, he very much related to him, but he also had some problems with him. But a couple of things in there. Certainly, I think he's talking about himself. He was pretty proud of himself, and he was called a boy wonder. So I think he really means himself. But think about this. Boy wonder, a real one, so good looking to hurt you. To see him ride his black horse, could be a motorcycle, by the way. He foretold the weather. You don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. The lean years, and the way music would go. I
Oh,
mean, definitely Dylan showed us the way music would go. So I think, and no one in the country had ever seen him. You never see the real guy. He was always wearing a mask. I don't think Frank certainly meant that to be about Dylan, but I think it's kind of it just came to mind as sort of an interesting connection there, just another boy wonder.
yeah.
And I think Frank was, he they did swim in the same waters a little bit. You know, you look at Tarantula, you look at Hard Rain's Gonna Fall. A lot of what Dylan, the way Dylan wrote, is pretty similar to Frank, I think. Do you agree with that?
I well, yeah, at first glance,
Hmm.
just in my mind, the way that they keep you wondering, like, what does this really mean? And it moves very quickly on to the next.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I agree. And I feel that this poem is very much um, frank about himself.
You bet.
I I feel that this is him, imagining, fantasizing, about what happens when he does take his life.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. Let's see. So he tied a willow switch to his neck. What do you make of swallowed all the butterflies thick as fog? Anything in particular come to mind there? That's one image there that is both beautiful but troubling to me. I struggle with that one a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's gasping for air.
Mm, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then of course the butterflies come back at the end. But so did you read, by the way, in the next line, he leapt in the bogue? Did you read it as bogue or bog?
I say bog.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is a southern pronunciation of that apparently that is bogue, and normally when we see the word
Yes.
bog, it's spelled B-O-G.
Right. We have Bogue Inlet in North Carolina on the
Do you?
coast.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm surprised that I didn't see it as Bogue,
Hmm.
because I think it's spelled exactly like we spell it back home. I'm looking
Hmm.
for the word now. Um,
And it virtually means the same thing as bog.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's sort of a Louisiana or maybe a deep South kind of
yeah,
Cajun word, perhaps.
yeah,
Um, I love the eyes wide open like tambourines. The mandolins were a little more, not quite so literal, but that's almost a literal thing to me. The wide, eyes wide open like tambourines. You know that round white image of a
yeah,
tambourine for
yeah.
sure.
As he is hung by his switch.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Did you want to say anything about it? I kind of glossed over a few lines there. Is there anything else you want to say before we move on to the fisherman?
The fisherman.
Yeah, before.
No, go right ahead. You know what I did, and I won't go into this now, but I sort of wrote notes for certain lines.
Well,
Um,
but please share that if you want to, and um, any of the notes you have down to that sort of the middle of the poem there. We're down to "and the mandolins of the Ozarks." Do you have any of those lines there? I'd love to hear some of the notes you wrote.
I started making. I think that um, I had a question in for the closing line, but I wrote meanings of what I thought all of the findings from inside his belly might mean.
Okay, let's hold off on that before we
Yeah,
get down there. Okay,
yeah,
okay. A fisherman down the way. I think he spent some time, if I'm not mistaken, as a fishing guide. I know he was a land surveyor. He worked
hmm,
outside a lot.
yeah,
Um, and I think his father worked on levees, if I'm not mistaken, and he worked with his father and then ended up becoming an actual land surveyor himself. But fishing and fishermen definitely appear a lot in his poetry. And I don't know about you, but when I hear the word the Ozarks, I instantly think of fishing. I grew up in Kansas City, and we would go to the Ozarks to go fishing. And I know the Ozarks are about a lot more than that, but that's sort of an interesting connection there. We're in the Ozarks.
yeah,
One thing
yeah,
people can't see unless you look at the poem are some of the really fascinating enjambments, the line breaks. For example, uh, a fisherman down the way heard his neck break.
yeah,
The line breaks there.
yeah,
And then later there's another really fascinating, oh, when they cut.
He gives himself a witness. He gives himself a witness. Not just a witness, but somebody that will carry his body back to town.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. That's the fisherman?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so. Down
Yeah,
the
well, I
way.
think you're right. Yeah.
They cut him down.
Uh-huh.
They cut him down. Crying the bow horse.
And there's another great line break. They cut him.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. It sounded like a cracking bow or an oar. You know how you tell a horse, get up. Now,
Get up.
it
Get up.
giddy up, get up.
Yeah.
What I have a one thought about that it's sort of it's that sudden sound, that up, that it's his neck breaking. It's that get up, that just
Yeah.
real sharp.
Yeah.
I don't know if we can make any more of the horse there. The horse, we start off with the horse at the beginning when he's riding his black horse, and
Yes.
and then at the end we do. Does the horse come up again? I think.
Yes, it says, and it says just one horse. It says later in life, the
Yeah,
horse.
the horse.
Yeah.
And this was a horse. So it's not, yeah, it's not specific. It's just that he's just saying that sound, that sharp.
Right.
Yeah. Now, why?
The horse probably ran off by the time the fisherman got there.
Okay.
The black horse was gone.
Okay. Okay. And notice it's a black horse, not a white horse.
No, it's a black horse.
For sure.
Just like this is a black panther on the
Yes,
cover.
that's right. And by the way,
that jet black. Yeah.
Yeah. And that cover is sort of an imitation of the what is that classic painting? It is The Sleeping Gypsy by Rousseau, where there's actually a lion as opposed to that Black Panther. But yeah, black probably figures heavily in his life for sure. He's definitely didn't see himself as the white guy in the white horse, more of the black horse kind of guy. And of course there's girls involved. That doesn't surprise me, but the girls asked the blacksmith. Now, why do we have a blacksmith? We don't have a veterinarian. We don't have a doctor. We don't have a mortician. We have a blacksmith. What do you think about that?
Blacksmith would have, blacksmiths make horses' shoes, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the blacksmith and the rider of this black horse, were often seen in the same lean-to, shop, whatever, talking, being menfolk.
Mm-hmm.
I know. Well, blacksmithing is a big deal also in Arkansas, if I'm not mistaken. Like, I know a blacksmith in Arkansas. There's places in the world where people still make their own tools. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's, it's out in the country. Maybe there is no doctor.
It's still yeah.
And sure enough, I'm not sure why it's sure enough, but sure enough, they found the mourning cloaks, the arrowhead. These are things in his belly. Mourning cloaks, arrowhead, string, parts of a broom, a rolled up map, which I would definitely connect to his work as a surveyor. I'm sure he carried around rolled up maps a lot.
Yeah.
No trace of love. That's a mournful little moment there.
Yeah.
No trace of love.
This is him, these are his things. These are the things that he used. I mean, when it comes to the line, no trace of love, this is him admitting, I'm sorry, everybody. I'm sorry I broke your heart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's an irony there of a guy who who was a philanderer, and I think at one point, so there was a famous scene before he committed suicide where he was basically living with two different women at the same time, and they got together and confronted him, and said, "You got to choose one of us, or we're both gone," which I think is generous on their part. But supposedly they put bras and panties all over his truck so that when he came back, they were there to confront him in this really embarrassing, horrible scene, meant to really shame him. And he went down the street, borrowed a revolver, and came back and killed himself. So here's a guy who clearly was in search of love, in search of human connection, and yet no trace of love.
I don't know what stops that in a human being, that otherwise maybe they lived a completely comfortable life. There was a mother and a father. There was enough interaction in the family. I think they were all intelligent people. I don't know if he was an only child. I have everything to read about yet. I am so not as deep into it as you are. But, did he just want to be a dark horse? Did he want to live this kind of life? I mean, he never even really left the Ozarks. He never really left the South. He could have gone to Los Angeles.
Yeah. Or New
But
York.
would that have ruined him?
Yeah.
Would he have lost all identity?
Yeah.
Was he cultivating his identity of this dark horse character? Is this what he thrived on?
You bet. I mean, he couldn't. It sounds cliche, but he couldn't not. I think that's just who he was, and he was a genius, but he was also mad. I mean, someone who shoots himself 3 times in the chest is not very stable, and
Yeah,
he was. I think he was probably in a lot of pain in his life, and I think that I
but
think that
did he create that pain himself? Like, what was the source of his pain?
no trace of love is what instantly came to mind when you say that. I think that is a really significant half line in this, or anything else. No trace of love. I think he's a guy he wanted human connection. Obviously, he's got 11 women going at the same time, and I think I've read some of his letters to Alan Dugan, and um, he definitely was very interested in people hearing his poetry. He was very anti-academic, though. He did not. It wasn't interested in in.
Studying
Say that
anything.
again.
Wasn't interested in studying even what he was doing.
So yeah, I think that's the no trace of love. Now it's so interesting. We have the word then. Then it rained. The butterflies turned to dust like the boy's hair. Later in life, I think what we're talking about here is down the road, in the future, after he's been buried, he's turned to dust. The butterflies have turned to dust. His hair has turned to dust. The horse drinks from stones. I'm not sure about the drinks from stones, but somehow that conjures up images of burial as well to me.
Okay. This is a really interesting last couple of lines here. And I think I've thought about this section more than the rest. So may I go back and talk
Please.
about the ingredients in his stomach?
Yes. Love to hear it.
Okay. So let's go to this section. The girls asked the blacksmith to open his belly. And we can maybe assume that these girls were his followers. Sure enough, they found the mourning cloaks. And I just thought of death, like him seeing people,
Yes.
the clothes that people would wear to the funerals. But maybe these are the mourning cloaks of the women whose hearts were broken.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. Yeah.
The arrowhead, maybe in my mind, is a boyish thing, like maybe it comes from the creek that he plays in, that he falls in the bogue, I guess.
Mhm.
Some string, there's the kite. Also, a surveyor. Does a surveyor run line, or do they only look through a scope? Parts of a broom. When it came to parts of a broom, I thought of him just it just being like an everyday something that he carries with him, something to clear a space where he is, just to dust things off.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
a rolled up map. I didn't think of him being the surveyor there. I just thought of. I just wrote down the word destination, um,
Mhm.
and then and
And
then I just
it's rolled up though. It's not laid out. It's rolled
right,
up somehow.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
Mo- Um, so when it comes to then it rained, the butterflies turned to dust like the boy's hair. Um, that seems more like immediate to me, like after his death, like
Mm.
sometime just after. And then when it says later in life, the horse drinks from stones. In my mind, that this is that the horse continues to go back to where he fell, and everyone reckons the rain might have touched his toes, broken his fall. And this is where maybe the horse came back to, um, in a maybe, I don't know, it's some intermittent time when his body still laid there and the horse was around him and, smelling him and
Mm.
licking the water off of his feet, the rainwater.
Mm. Fascinating. I didn't get that at all, but yeah, that's really interesting. Let me play the devil's advocate here and ask you, Terry, and I'm definitely playing the devil's advocate because I'm deep into Frank Stanford right now and probably will continue to be for a while. I just ordered his collected poems. Can't wait for
Yeah.
the biography to come out.
Oh my God. Don't let me forget about that one.
I won't. But
Lu-
let me
Lucinda's, I'm sorry, Lucinda's phone must be ringing off the hook these days.
yeah, yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah. But let me play the devil's advocate and say to anyone who's listening to this, why in the hell would you be so interested and fascinated by a guy's poems who is so difficult to understand? I mean, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to a lot of people. A lot of people are going to read this and say, well, why doesn't he just say what he means? What the hell is all this convoluted crap about? Now, again, I'm playing the devil's advocate. I'm just curious what you would say to that.
Well, I probably wouldn't if I hadn't, you know, read his name in some other writer's memoirs who I, appreciate and respect.
Hmm.
That's how I pick up movies, films, and books. Is I read somebody else mention the poem or mention the book or mention the film or mention the music.
Frank
There's no.
Stanford is Tom Waits' favorite poem, I've heard, which is not a big surprise. And when you have Lucinda Williams and Tom Waits saying this is their favorite poem,
Yeah.
that means something.
Which poem is it?
No, poet. I'm sorry.
Poet. Okay.
Tom Waits has said Frank Stanford is his favorite poet.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I wonder how Tom Waits found them.
Yeah, who knows? But let me push this just a little further, and then we need to kind of wrap up here. Maybe it's not even Frank Stanford, just any kind of poetry that you have to work so hard to derive meaning from. You and I think both take it for granted that we love this stuff and we're compelled by it. But I just want to speak for a moment for those people who say, I don't understand. Why doesn't he just write in a more clear way?
C.D. Wright is also the same way. It's very vague. She also has a theme running through, like Frank often uses the moon as in inspiration, or it's like a character. It's like a character in his poems. Poetry is not for everyone. And I was just thinking a minute ago, there's no Spotify for poetry. It's not like you can listen to one thing and then find a familiar, something like it that's going to play right behind it.
Yeah.
I have a poem here, a short one that's called "The Moon" by Frank. If you'd like to hear it, I don't know if you've read it. You probably have. It's very short.
Yeah.
I did something interesting. I put numbers next to each line, and then I made footnotes with each number down below the poem. Anyways, it's called "The Moon." I think it is a ship putting out without me, a white horse that throws all riders, and a swimmer who is naked, who believes she is asleep. It is a rooster molting dark feathers in the water, or a beekeeper who dreams someone has found her out in the garden, a snake which sheds its skin in the riverbed at night, and a schoolgirl weeping under a black patch. I know it is only a stone everybody keeps a blind date with. I know it is only a stone everybody keeps a blind date with. So those were 8 lines, and I wrote down the words for line number 1, abandonment. Line number 2, rejection. 3, invisible. 4, shame, ? 5, lonely, solitary. 6, fearful, vulnerable. 7, grieving. 8, drawn to, desirous. And unless I read those lines to you, you might not know what those words were relating to, but I enjoyed my little study of these 2 poems and writing these side notes to them. I probably will do that right inside the book instead of in my side ledger over here. But anyways, thank you for this time.
You bet. I hate to resort to this line, but I guess my answer to people is if you don't get it, I can't explain it to you. if you are not compelled by these images and want to read more, then I can't explain it. It's not intended to be a straight ahead narrative to teach us something or to be easily digested and understood. It's analogous maybe to an abstract painting that is sort of mysterious, and you don't ask what that means. You just enjoy it. You hear the sound of these words, you see the images, and just marvel at this incredibly active mind of his.
Yeah.
Terry, can you take us out by reading the poem from start to finish for us?
Oh, sure.
Great.
Kite Tied to a Tombstone. Frank Stanford. They say there was a boy wonder, I mean a real one, so good looking it hurt you to see him ride his black horse. He foretold the weather, the lean years, and the way the music would go. No one in the country had ever seen him. They only heard what the gypsies told. Now this boy took a willow switch one night, tied it to his neck, swallowed all the butterflies, thick as fog. He leapt in the bog, eyes wide open like tambourines and the mandolins of the Ozarks. A fisherman down the way heard his neck break. He said it sounded like a cracking bow or an oar. You know how you tell a horse, get up. They cut him down, took him to town. Then the girls asked the blacksmith to open his belly. Sure enough, they found the mourning cloaks, the arrowhead, some string, parts of a broom, a rolled up map. No trace of love or anything else. Then it rained. The butterflies turned to dust like the boy's hair. Later in life, the horse drinks from stones, and everyone reckons the rain might have touched his toes, broken his fall.
Frank Stanford.
Frank Stanford.
Terry Binion, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
Stay in touch.
Yes.
All right.
All right. See you.